And good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, wherever you are joining us from. I am Hannah Shea, World Law Group's Manager of Communications and Network Development. Thank you for joining us today for our E and ESG webinar. Before I turn the program over, I'd like to note a few housekeeping items. You have been muted with your camera turned off upon arrival. Please remain so throughout the duration of the presentation until Q&A at the end. If you have a question throughout, you can use the chat feature, or at the end, you may raise your hand using the raise hand feature when we open up the Q&A. This presentation will be recorded and available on the website soon after the session. And lastly, this is the first in our ESG and compliance series, which is focusing on environmental, and we will announce the S and the G soon, which will happen in the fall. So now I'll turn it over to Roland Mayer at Globe EU to say just a few words before we turn this over to our moderator. Roland?
Yes, thank you, Hannah. I'm here to convey the unfortunate message that Sirpa Pietikainen, who was supposed to take part in this panel, is not able to participate. Sirpa very much regrets that she will not be able to participate. She fell ill yesterday and doesn't feel well enough to take part. She is, however, a big proponent of ambitious ESG requirements, especially where reporting can be instrumental in encouraging companies to better their performances and where compliance is based on a systemic approach. And she asked me, therefore, to wish you a very good meeting and hopes to be invited in the forthcoming World Law Group event on a topic that has her interest. So, and I'm going to leave it with that and give the floor back to Ivan, who is, I think, going to take over the moderation of the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Roland, and hello and welcome to the World Law Group ESG series. This event, as you know, is hosted by Globe EU and the World Law Group. Established in 1988, the World Law Group is one of the oldest and largest network of independent business law firms, specially created to meet the legal needs of today's multinational companies. Currently, the World Law Group provides immediate access to 60 member firms and to the expertise of over 21,000 legal professionals in 94 countries. This panel is focused on ESG. But what is ESG? ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, three broad areas and categories now considered by most investing firms who are selecting investing alongside, of course, traditional analysis. ESG investing is growing exponentially as more investors utilize ESG tools to support their investment decision-making. The practice of ESG investing began many decades ago as socially responsible investing, with investors excluding stock and entire industries from their portfolios based only on ESG concerns. Now, ESG has become an important factor for several different reasons, from responding to investor pressure and managing financial risk to reducing cost and waste. In addition, of course, to improving the quality of living of those that are somehow affected by corporate activities. Every company in the world is now facing, in a daily basis, ESG issues, and ignoring them can significantly increase the risk of experiencing negative consequences. Then, either we like it or not, ESG standards are here to stay. But how to comply with environmental standards? This is a very difficult question, as environmental standards varies from country to country. However, from reporting obligations and due diligence to self-compliance, all of them aim to achieve one same goal: a better world and a sustainable environment. But what is new with that? In the reality, not much. But corporations are now facing strong social scrutiny, and governments are really willing to enforce environmental laws. Then we're living in the era when the paradigm changed, when more and more corporations are not only looking for financial profitability, but to contribute to the environment and to the society. Today, you will hear from our outstanding panel of experts different but coincident perspectives on environmental standards and compliance that will go from the social to the private and from Europe to South America. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists in a strict alphabetical order. First, we have Matthew Cohn. Matthew is the Assistant General Counsel for Environmental Matters at USG. USG is one of the leading companies in the production of drywalls and operates over 100 production facilities in the Americas. Then we have Salvador Dan. He is the Chief Governance and Compliance Officer of Petrobras. Petrobras is the leading Brazilian oil company. We have Lilia Hawa. Lilian is the Director of Probosque Chapultepec. As you may know, Chapultepec is one of the largest urban parks in the world and received funding from various different private and public sources. And then we have Brigitte Jordan Anderson, partner at Warlock Group Norwegian member Stock. Now, I will turn to the panelists, starting firstly with Brigitte. Brigitte, of course, it is an honor to have you here. We know that ESG is not a new topic, but there are multiple actions taken in a regional level in Europe, and we would like to hear from you a little bit more about that.
Thank you very much, Ivan, for inviting me and to speak here. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what's happening in Europe. I myself have been working on the regulation on the power and the gas market and sustainable law for over 20 years, living in Brussels for over 16, 17, but also heading an office because in pandemic, it was a lot from the living room. But anyway, I think what we have to see when we talk about this is actually you have to see the big picture. We are under the umbrella in Europe, but also global wise in the green transition. In Europe, it's the Green Deal, and that is everywhere. And also when you look at the ESG and taxonomy that I will speak about, you have to look at the Green Deal around it. So in Europe already we are on our way with the taxonomy. That's really the buzzword and had been the buzzword for several years. And I will speak a little bit of what taxonomy is because it's not for sure that everyone knows about taxonomy. Taxonomy is actually a classification system. It is about seeing whether your companies have activities that falls inside these classification systems and making them sustainable. And as you said, Ivan, this is something, ESG reporting is something that will come no matter what, either you want it or not. But not just look at it as an obligation, look at it as a competition advantage. Even though you don't have to report, learn to put your business in doing this before you have to, because then you will have a competitive advantage. So it's also something very positive. And this classification system, it is actually a regulation, a kind of a mother law that gives conditions how you will classify your activities. Taxonomy is a voluntary tool. It is about turning the private money into the green transition, but it's a mandatory tool for those companies today that need to report. And that means that you create transparency and the investors will know where to put the money if they want to go in the green transition. And that's what we see. The money wants to go to the green transition. So it's a very creative way of doing it. So this regulation puts up some conditions for your activities. So your activities have to contribute to one or several of 6 environmental objectives. And then environmental objectives in taxonomy, it's climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, the sustainable use and protection of water, marine resources, the transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, and the protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So if you actually contribute to one of these goals, you at the same time have to make sure that you not significantly make harm to any of the other ones. And those criteria that will be actually upheld will be in so-called delegated regulation. And here we get very legal wise, but to know the procedures in Brussels, it's very important because when you're going to lobby your viewpoints, you need how to know where to lobby. And this has been a very political debate in Norway and in Europe. I was actually, so my background is that I'm a lawyer, but I also work for the EFTA Secretariat. And that's why I negotiated all the relevant acts into the EE agreement on energy and state aid. Then I went to the Commission and I worked in DG Energy as a political advisor and was actually negotiating on behalf of the Commission with the European Parliament and Council. And then I was in the EFTA Surveillance Authority. But I was also heading and being the lawyer for something called Energy Norway, which is actually an association of all renewable energy in the production, in the transportation, and in supply. And there I was really lobbying for taxonomy, because taxonomy gives the financial umbrella. So during this time, we were really negotiating on the first Climate Delegated Act, which was concerning activities that more or less were keeping 80% of the emissions in Europe. And it was very, very political, and it's also very technical to do this. And at that time, I was really talking about hydro, which was very, very important for Norway. But I was sitting in networks with alliances all over Europe, not only just for hydro, because you need to see your friends and see who can actually speak the same truth as you do. So, and truth becomes in political environments, it's also for the viewer to see. So it's really lobbying, trying to put your evidence ahead that the delegation will go as such. And we ended up with some very good results and some less good results, but that's democracy for you. You're not always getting totally what you want, but you're trying to get your compromises as good as it gets. And now in taxonomy, it's also decided that the disclosure that companies that falls in this taxonomy needed actually to report from January this year. So it's already started. And on the top of it, there's a new delegated act for gas and nuclear, which was very, very political sensitive. The gas was actually part of the first climate delegated act, but it was so political sensitive that they actually commissioned, in order to let this pass, they had to create their own delegated act for gas and nuclear. And today, also with the horrible wars going on in Ukraine, it's very political sensitive to move this ahead. And this we also have to have due respect of. So on the top of this taxonomy, it's quite difficult to get grasp of, because it's quite of a big regulation, and that is a challenge both for companies but also for lawyers and for consultants to really follow this. I call it the gift that keeps on giving, because it's a moving target. The taxonomy will be all the time revised, new activities will come in, and new environmental objectives will be regulated. On the top of it, there is a corporate sustainable directive, which actually changes the criteria for which companies need to report, and also changes a little bit the scope. And this has been proposed April last year, but not yet been adopted. Under this directive, there will also be standards produced, which I think will be very helpful, because a lot of companies now, they see how to report on all this. It's quite immense what we are facing in Europe, and it's going fast. So I think templates, and I know also the Europe is negotiating globally to trying to make templates that actually hand in hand globally do to make this go forward. In addition, in February this year, the Commission also proposed a directive of due diligence. So again, follow these as companies. I think it's very important. Be ahead, learn and lean in, and start looking at your company, see what your activities, what kind of effect it has on climate and human rights, and then make your reporting standards and your due diligence. The more you are up in front, the better competitive advantage you have, and then you are part of this green transition that we all have to be part of. So I'm advising on all sustainable law. And that's why it's very important, as I say, to have an overview. And now also what we have seen in Europe is that taxonomy is now linked to the revised stated guideline on climate, energy, environmental protection. So not only the private capital will be turned with the taxonomy, but also public support money will have an interlink with the taxonomy. I can talk a long time about how this maybe will be interlinking, but I don't have the time, I'm sorry. But you know, you can ask questions or you can call me or contact me and I will try to answer as good as I can. But it's important to see the whole picture of this, how the money is moving. And it's not then only companies who need to learn about taxonomy, it's also public authorities, which also it's challenging with everything that is going on. So I think with this, I tried to give a little bit of overview what's going on in Europe on the E, which is a lot, and there's a lot more going on the E. But with the minutes I've been giving, I hope that you got a little bit of a perspective what's going on in Europe.
Thank you, Brigitte. I have a question for you, and just listening to your explanation. And my question is, how difficult is for small or medium-sized companies to start complying or to start learning about taxonomy? It sounds like it is quite complicated, or it is not like a very auto-explicative directive. And how difficult will be for that kind of companies to actually get into this kind of green transition?
I think it's challenging, and it's not just challenging for small companies, and also this corporate sustainable directive will actually make them included, because all listed companies, even medium and companies, will be actually under the taxonomy. But I do also think that there is a leniency in the system. Get your system out there. I don't think it will be penalized, because I think it's really everybody is a little bit of the same level playing field, and you can learn on sharing best practices. And also, if you're part of a bigger company, to trying to, resources, or if you are in customer someone, or call lawyers sometimes if you want to have some help to get this set in order. And I do think also that the most important thing now is trying to get down to it. Talk to people that are doing it, sharing best practices. Is that what we can do in this green transition? Is to share with each other in order to move ahead.
Well, it was very interesting. It is completely different, I think, from what we are seeing in other parts of the world. We're turning now to Salvador. Salvador will... How is the things going in Brazil, and how do you see this approach of addressing ESG issues and environmental issues as a whole, not just as individual efforts?
Thanks, Ivan. Thanks for the question and for the invitation. It's a great pleasure joining today's webinar. I think to start my points, it's important to highlight the oil and gas industry, as all the traditional sectors already declared their net zero ambitions, or already are working towards achieving their emissions reduction and carbon footprints strategic goals. Petrobras is not different. The Brazilian companies are not different. I think the contribution of a strong governance and compliance program to the company's ESG strategy, it's the main topic I would like to address. First, being the foundation of the ESG strategy every company is setting up. By saying the foundation, I mean, how do you want to, or how the companies are expecting to deliver and to achieve those ESG metrics and commitments? My answer would be they could not achieve those results if they are not supported by a strong ethics and integrity mindset, making sure their situation is transparently disclosed, their numbers, the current situation is fully open and accountable to every single counterparts, stakeholders, supplier network, especially for those listed companies, the information they are providing are accurate. But on the other side, by having a strong decision-making process to support the company, not only setting those goals, but especially how they are tracking the results, how they are reporting the results. We are seeing a lot of greenwashing discussions around the globe and how companies are using the ESG label to promote themselves, but at the same time, how they are actually executing their strategy. And on top of that, how the companies are incentivizing their management to deliver those results. If the governance portion is the decision-making process, is not strongly organized towards a good commitment, but also how do you incentivize your management to deliver those results, probably you are putting your strategy in risk. In case of Petrobras, just to give you a very practical example, we have not only declared our net zero ambition, but also a $2.8 billion investment for the next 5 years. I'm not an engineering, I'm not an environmental expert, but my responsibility on this is make sure that we are spending the money the best way possible, how we are addressing those resources the best way possible in order to achieve not only our declaration, but making the best use in terms of economics, in terms of legal obligation, but also in terms of society expectation, right? So we have secured some of those resources to decarbonizing operation, which is a short-term results and short-term initiatives, but at the same time, another portion of the resources dedicated to find potential new lines of business, new products, renewable energy, potential diversifying the oil and gas footprint Petrobras has today for the next 2-3 decades. So those are the main decisions the company must do right now, and my structure is responsible to support this decision-making process, because whatever we decide now will make effects and will have consequences in 2 or 3 decades. Together with that, I think the next important topic is how we monitor and how we consolidate information from our supply chain network, how we are comfortable operating with suppliers, with contractors, with partners, and even our downstream distributor chain to make sure we are all aligned in the same ESG strategy. In the oil and gas sector, we rely very much on our supply network in terms of emissions and carbon footprint. So how we are fully addressing those topics requires a strong due diligence process to vetting the right vendors to be part of our supply network. And the same when we talk about our distribution network, right? The downstream program also requires a strong due diligence, but also a strong continuous monitoring strategy in order to make sure the outcomes of our products, the outcomes of our projects are duly executed and are correctly addressed. And I give you a good example on the automotive industry. It's out of the oil and gas directly, but also talks about new energies and the energy transition that we're going to face more and more. So the automotive industry is already mixing fuel, but also electric vehicle based. But what we are seeing now is the first generation of electric vehicle being recycled. And what the big companies, automotive companies, are facing is what to do with the old batteries and how to recycle and how to store and how to destroy those old batteries. So, which is a new issue, a new compliance issue for the automotive sector that was not relevant 10 years ago. So those are the evolving discussions that we have to face as a compliance professional to support the ESG strategy by having a strong risk approach. And when I say risk approach, I'm pretty sure the risks that the oil and gas industry are facing today will be strongly different in 10, 15, 20 years onwards. That's my initial contributions for today.
Thank you very much, Salvador. I have a couple of questions for you. First, you were, I don't know if you could tell us a little bit more, I think, about how ESG standards and environmental goals, as you say, that you have a large budget, but that large budget is not just for donations or for, I don't know, reforestation. It's also to be used in creating new lines of business that are actually environmental friendly or that have some new goals and a new future for the company. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And because I think that sometimes there's a kind of a misconception of within those two topics. One is contributing to the environment by giving donations and giving, I don't know, reforestation and socially responsible activities. And then you have this other part that is actually creating new things and developing technology for having less contamination, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have to segregate our social responsibility strategy from what are the core business engineering strategies, right? Of course, there are several common topics that will mix up the discussion, but as a strategy, when we say we have $2.8 billion on resources for the next 5 years, is how we are using this money to improve our efficiency in terms of exploring production, but also reducing our carbon footprint, either by being more efficient the way we are exploring oil and gas from our offshore platforms, by investing in electric platform, by investing in separation of CO2, in reinjection of CO2, etc. Very technical and very engineering discussion, which I'm very basic learner on those projects, or by investing in new bio products, renewable energy, and so on. So those are the key strategies that not only Petrobras, but most of the oil and gas industry is now moving on. Some companies are already announcing big projects on solar, nuclear, whatever. I have an important portion of my budget that my group is responsible to organize the discussions, to coordinate what would be the best approach. And there is an important criteria here, which is the economics. We need to be profitable. Those projects must make sense. It's not only about spending the money on reforestation. It's not only making our social contribution for the society, because back to your initial point, those are our social and corporate responsibility strategies. And here we have different approaches. It's not about profit, of course, it's about the impacts we can make to positively change the society we are in. So the combination of efficiency, value creation, fully integrated with our skills, capabilities, technologies, and of course, what deliver the best efficiency in terms of carbon capture and carbon emission. So those are the key elements.
Thank you very much, Salvador. I think it's very clear. And we have we then move to Lilia. Lilia is the director of Probosque Chapultepec. Probosque, as she will explain further on, is a trust that contributes to the Chapultepec Park, that it's one of the largest parks in Mexico and in Mexico City and in the world. So Lilia, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ivan, for the invitation, and it's a pleasure and an honor to share this panel with Matthew, Salvador, Brigitte, so thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. So can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, I'm going to explain you a little bit about the Fund Trust, which is the Chapultepec Fund Trust. This is the Chapultepec Park, which is located in Mexico City, and it's one of the largest and most overpopulated cities in the world with 22 million inhabitants. So we have we're very fortunate to have this wonderful active heart, which is the Chapultepec Park. With more than 3,500 years of history, more than 750 hectares, so that you can have an idea, it's almost 3 times bigger than Central Park. It's divided in 4 sections. And this green lung is one of the oldest and most extensive urban forests in Latin America. In 2003, it was decreed as an area of high environmental value on the category of urban forest. We have, as an important data, 20 million visitors per year. And we have a lot of festivals, films, projections, concerts, night picnics. We have a castle, we have a lot of history, a culture. And as an environmental area, it's the most important lung in Mexico City. This is just an example of a festival that we had just 2 weeks ago. And we had 2.6 million visitors in 12 days with more than 80 activities. What I want to show you here is the importance of a green space in a big city. It's a place of inclusion, of diversity, family. It's a democracy place, a place of celebration, of sports, of conference, and most important is a free space for everybody. What's the Probosque Chapultepec and why I'm here? Well, it is very important to tell you that facing an urgent need in 2004, that the park was in really very bad conditions, a group of businessmen decided to join the city's government and the Citizen Advisory Board to begin a recovery of the Chapultepec Park. So we constituted a trust and took the responsibility of fundraising through campaigns, events, and alliances to hire a remarkable interdisciplinary group of experts. And in collaboration with authorities and the Citizen Advisory Board, the team began the planning, development, and co-financing of the 4 sections of the master plans with the goal of restoring and upgrading the woodlands, a milestone that required cooperative efforts and sustainable investments. How does this management team work? This is a very interesting, and I think it's a success of what we have built in these past 18 years of the trust, is that we have the 3 institutes working together. So we have in one side, the Mexico City Department of Environment through the mayor of the city. They are the owners of the park and they are the authority. Then we have a Citizen Advisory Board, which is integrated by 7 prominent civilians. We have architects, engineers, we have lawyers, we have experts, and it's an honorary place to be here. And it's an interdisciplinary group committed to the park's comprehensive rehabilitation and enhancement. And then we have the Probosque Trust, this is the trust where I've been the CEO for more than 14 years. And it's the product of a private venture wholly devoted to raising funds for the urban forest preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation. So this is our magic formula that has been working for more than 19 years, and it has been really successful. How do we work? Where every fund month, the trust committee holds a meeting to present the fundraising program along with projects, work schedules, events, and you can see a picture of it in the high part of the picture. And then every month we have a session where the three instances work together: the authority, represented by the Secretary of Environmental, the Citizen Council, and the trust. So every project that will work in the park, it has to be reviewed and it has to have the approval of the Citizen Council. This is the organization chart of the government. So it's the major, and then we have the Chapultepec Forest Management. Our trust is integrated by 18 board members and 1 president. And our mission is to contribute to the Bosque de Chapultepec sustainability by developing plans, executing projects, conducting research, and raising funds, in synchronizing with the public and private stakeholders in benefit of the Chapultepec Trust. Our main value is our transparency. It's the most important value that we have. And we have our code of ethics, annual reports, manual of policies and procedures, and our strategic planning that we work on it every 6 years. And this year we work it with Bain & Company. It is very important to mention the transparency once again. We are audited by Deloitte, and we work with SMFI, which is a Mexican Center of Philanthropy. We do have our compliance process. So first we have to have our project definition, our fundraising process, the resources assigned to the project that the donor choose, which is very important that we cannot use the money in any project that we want. So it's like a specific projects, a specific donations. Then we have the project execution, and a monthly project progress reports are delivered to the donor. We have a specific analysis and report of the trustee to validate the donations. This is very important with our tax administration system. So every donation has a process and is completely transparent. We do have a fundraising process. So first of all, the users' opinions and needs are taken to develop the projects through public surveys. Then we choose a project through a master plan, which is developed in an interdisciplinary professionals and in coordinations with the three instances, government, citizens, and the trust. Then we approve the project, we execute the project and the master plans, then we fundraise through different strategies, and there we also do the donor recognition. Our main fundraising is coming from big donors, that's the 70%. It's through companies, foundations, civil society. We have also international donors, government organizations, individual donors, events, and merchandising. And for the past 19 years, the trust has raised over $29 million. Our master plans, we do have a work on 3 master plans, and we have invested a lot of money. But the most important thing of these master plans is that they are worked together in conjunction with the authorities, with the government, with the civilians, and with the trust. So having this big project that is approved by everybody, it's our project. So then it's very easy to have the approval of the citizens and to start fundraising the money. Our core sectors are mobility, water, commerce and services, green spaces, and recreational areas. And a very important part of these donations that we get from different companies is to invite the people of the companies to work as volunteers. So we have a very success volunteer program with more than 686,000 hours of volunteer time, more than 9 million pesos in donations, and more than 50,000 volunteers. So I think this is a great example of what we can do together, government, civilians, and a trust. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lilian. And we know that the Chapultepec Park, as you told us, sometime before the webinar, won the award, won an award, right? One of the best urban parks in the world. But my question here for you is, how did you manage so many interests? You have the government, you have the private, the trust, and you have the civilians there. How did you manage to get into an actual plan and to an actual, how do you take decisions? Because I mean, the interest of one group might not be the interest of the others. And how do you put all that interest together?
I think that the success is a great question and it's quite difficult, but I think this is exactly what has been the success of this tripartite management team. So as I told you, every month we had a meeting where every project that has to be done in the park has to have the approval of the three parts, especially of the civilian advisory. And the way we're working is that we developed 1 year in advance a very big master plan with all these specialist architects, environmentalists, very specific and interdisciplinary group. So we work this big project, this master plan together, and afterwards is divided in specific projects, and then we divide which projects are going to be work and done by the authorities and the government, and which projects are going to be financed and done by the trust. So it's really a teamwork, and it has been very successful for the last 19 years.
Thank you. And I think the work that the Probosque has done has been great. I mean, I'm from Mexico City. I know the park, and I knew how the park was many years ago, and it is nothing compared to the park today. So thank you very much, Lilia, for your work and your efforts. And now we will turn to Matt. Matt, as you know, is the Assistant General Counsel for Environmental Issues at WLG. Also, WLG is part of NAF. NAF, I hope I'm pronouncing the word correctly. It is one of the leading companies in drywall production. They have gypsum mines and production facilities all over the Americas. And I mean, it should be very difficult, Matt, for you and your company to have some control and monitoring over your production facilities in various different states in the US. And you will explain, of course, a little bit more about that. But with the federalism system, it is very difficult also to have a coincident point of view from the authorities or from laws. So what can you tell us about that?
Sure. Thank you to the World Law Group for the opportunity to speak, and to the other speakers for teaching us things I didn't know, and to all of you for listening. I thought one thing I was asked to talk about was I've recently made a transition from a law firm to in-house, and I thought I could share a couple thoughts on that. I am in the legal department at USG Corporation. And my role in the legal department is to focus on environmental due diligence, legacy liabilities, litigation, regulatory compliance, which I think is the majority of what we're going to be talking about today, watching for changes in the law, sensitivity to sustainability, looking at the sustainability issues, and product safety. So that's sort of the wheelhouse of what I do. And I've been with the company now for 6 months, but I've worked for the company for over 15 years. I was their outside counsel on environmental for a long time. And then before I was a lawyer, I was a scientist. So I have that perspective as a geologist, which is my practice. Really, the main difference in-house as compared to having been at a law firm is you're dealing with one client. Anything that has to do with environmental, I get involved in, whether I've done it before or not. You have to sort of figure things out. Then working with non-lawyers, I think, is the biggest attraction. And so I'm working with non-lawyers all the time. You have a need to explain things to business people at the corporate office and get to the bottom line of the issue. And their two most common questions are, how much is this going to cost and how long will this take? And then all the details are left to the environmental people. It's fast paced. There's a lot of meetings. And I think the biggest difference is that you're the client. You're not making, you're not giving them options. You're actually making the decision. So that I think is the biggest change in going in-house. Now about the E and ESG at USG. So initially, I just want to talk about our values. We conduct our worldwide operations in an environmentally responsible manner and in compliance with environmental laws and regulations. And also we work to use water and other resources more efficiently, reduce waste, and transform secondary waste into valuable new resources. We're an industry leader in the design and manufacture of building materials and that use more recycled content, consume less energy to make and use, and reduce global warming potential. So those are our values. And a little bit about the structure of the environmental compliance team and how that all works at USG. We have plants all over North America, primarily in the United States, but also in Canada and Mexico. And I'm going to focus mostly on the United States because that's what I deal with majority. And I think there's enough to cover just on the United States. Each of our plants has an environmental coordinator, and the environmental coordinator could be an engineer or a scientist or somebody at the plant who's responsible for handling that particular plant's environmental compliance. And then at the corporate office, we have the environmental service group, which consists of 4 engineers and scientists who assist the plants in compliance. And they're the technical people that kind of manage environmental compliance for the company. And their primary function, I think their biggest role, is to do environmental compliance audits. And they make it their goal to visit the plants on a regular basis. And each plant should be audited generally every 3 years. And then in the legal department, there's me, and I provide legal support on all environmental issues for the plants and for the services group. And that includes enforcement, litigation, regulatory analysis, legal interpretations, and strategies. And I do want to talk about kind of the big picture of what I deal with. And this is this concept. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of United States environmental law from what we say the 30,000-foot perspective, the flyover perspective, but for most people that's 9,146 meters. So, but that's the perspective. Cooperative federalism, the term of art is cooperative federalism. And what cooperative federalism is this idea that the state governments, our 50 states, and the national government share power and collaborate on their overlapping functions. And that's the basis of how environmental law is structured in the United States. And that's in contrast to the concept of dual federalism, which is based on the idea that the federal and state functions function separately and distinctly. So let me explain that in very practical terms. In the United States, there are several federal environmental laws that sort of set the ground rules and standards, but those laws are not administered exclusively by the federal government and primarily at the state and local level. And so these major laws include the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which deals with waste disposal, the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, and the Toxic Substances Control Act, and the Endangered Species Act. And so these statutes are federal statutes administered at the state and local level. And so it would be much easier if all these laws were administered by one agency, the Environmental Protection Agency. But what we've got and what we deal with is we have facilities in the state of Wisconsin. So there we're dealing with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Or in Minnesota, we're dealing with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Or in New York, the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. Or California, which is enormous. And they have regions and multiple agencies. And so I think our biggest challenge is we're dealing with one set of laws primarily, but we've got many different agencies administering them. And each agency will have its own twist and nuanced approach to these federal regulatory programs. And then on top of that, the states are then supervised again by the EPA. So even if you satisfy the state, you still have to look to the EPA and what the EPA can do. So if you are in compliance with this from the state's perspective, and the EPA doesn't agree with what the state has done, the EPA can still do its own separate enforcement. And that's a concept called overfiling, where you can settle a matter with the state and then the EPA can come in and say, we're not satisfied with what the state has done. We think we should have been more strict. And so you still have to deal with the two agencies, and that's part of our challenge. It doesn't happen often because most states are doing a good job. And then on top of that, you do have state and local requirements that don't come out of federal law. So you might have special environmental statutes or regulations or rules to a particular locality that don't originate in federal law that add on to it. And so the Environmental Services Group and our legal department and the plants have to be aware of all of this when they deal with it in multiple jurisdictions. And that's our biggest challenge, but we're good at it because we have lots of people who do this for a living every day. A little bit about what an environmental audit is and the way we do it. An audit requires about a week, and it involves the Environmental Services Group, the environmental coordinator, the plant managers, and other people that are involved in environmental compliance. It generally consists of an opening meeting, a site inspection, a review of documents, interviews with personnel, a closing meeting, a report of findings and recommendations, and then there's follow-up. And these happen on generally a 3-year basis. The topics of an audit are broad. Every aspect of environmental law fits into an audit. So we're dealing with air pollution, water discharges, stormwater, sewer discharges, drinking water, groundwater, waste management, hazardous waste, the use of inert materials, universal waste. Those are things like fluorescent bulbs and batteries and things like that. Above ground storage tanks, below ground storage tanks, bulk storage containers, lead-based paints, asbestos, pesticides, noise, PCBs and electrical equipment, ozone depleting chemicals, hazardous materials management, hazardous substances reporting, spill prevention, and then we have some mining issues as well. And all of those are different at every plant, but that's what we're dealing with. So I do want to close with a final thought on sustainability. And we are very focused on sustainability. Sustainability really means to maintain something or to be in balance or in harmony ecologically and preserving and considering the availability of resources. And I would say having a sustainability program helps with traditional environmental compliance. And our sustainability program is focused on 3 things: reducing fossil fuels and shifting to renewable energy sources, reducing waste, and reducing the demand for water. And if you do all 3 of those things, then regardless of your environmental requirements, you're going to do a better job by default. So if you generate less waste, you're less likely to do things like exceed waste storage times or fail to file paperwork or send materials to a landfill that's unpermitted. If you reclaim your wastewater, you're less likely to violate discharge permits or fail to submit permit reports. And if you're not using fossil fuels or using less fossil fuels, you're less likely to have spills or contamination or air pollution. So I think as we move in the direction of sustainability, we're also helping the E in ESG because we are continuing to be more compliant environmentally. And that's a big part of what we do as well. So I think with that, my time is up, and I do appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all.
Thank you very much, Matt. I have a question for you, and it's about profitability. And of course, we are listening to you, and in my mind was, okay, these guys are putting a lot of money in auditing, and that is a cost for you. But in the other side, we're hearing about how you prevent and how you mitigate risks with these kind of audits. But in terms of profitability, and once you're inside a company and moving out from a law firm, how do you see that as a factor? Like, sometimes when we have clients as a law firm, we kind of fight with them or we have some resistance from them as compliance is a cost, but we have to explain to them how it is also part of their profit in the future, because they will not be using money for fines or things like that. Can you please elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. I think the biggest thing you can say is non-compliance is an expense. And so if you are achieving compliance, you're not getting your penalties, you're not getting fined, and you're going to be more efficient in the way you do things. And so I think it's very important. The other thing is, I think that from what I see, outside of the EPA and the agencies and enforcement, customers expect it, and it's more important now to be environmentally responsible, just because it's the expectation. It's not just the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to do, and that's why people should do it. But it's a business expectation, and we're finding that the market is looking at sustainability and environmental compliance in their buying decisions, and that is a driver as well. So I think it's just part of business now, and it's important for those reasons.
Yes, and I just remember a phrase like from a U.S. Attorney General, Paul McNally, say like, if you think compliance is expensive, try not compliance.
Well, that's
it's
yes.
a great
and there's 1,001 examples of that, and you can point to them all. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. I don't know if from the audience we have any questions or comments you want to address. We have received a couple of questions in the chat, but if you want, you can open your microphone and just ask the question. If not, I will go to the questions directly. First, I will have a question for Salvador. And we see that you are putting a big budget for the next 5 years, but how important is for a company to look for the future and not just getting into the short-term objectives?
Ivan, we used to say that direction is more important than speed. So what we are doing now, I think I mentioned, will drive the company's long-term execution. So that's why we've been very cautious in order to decide and define what should be the diversification strategy for Petrobras, considering we've been exploring oil and gas for the last 60, 70 years, and we are absolutely sure that we cannot explore oil and gas in 45, 50 years from now. So how the company will transition to a new industry after the net zero society is achieved is the discussions we are having now. And it's all about long-term strategy. It's not for today. We are, at the same time, we understand that the energy security is a short-term requirement. So oil and gas still are necessary to provide the necessary energy to support and to sustain the economical development the world requires now, and will keep requiring for the next few years. That's why Petrobras is clearly, in terms our short-term investments and resource allocation, to provide cost-efficient, low intense in terms of carbon emissions oil. So we believe providing a very efficient barrel to accommodate the energy needs of the humanity will be a competitive advantage for the coming years. However, we also understand that the decisions that must be made now is about the next few decades. So the money we are securing, the budget I mentioned, is about the next phase. What are the demands we need to address in order to build a society with renewable projects, biofuel, biogas, and so on?
Thank you very much, Salvador. We have a question from Mayara. Mayara, you can open your microphone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I would like to know, because when we speak about the E in ESG, it clearly demands some interaction with public authorities related to environmental laws. And of course, that contact can bring corruption risks. So I would like to know how to deal with that risk. So how to be the E in the ESG and making sure that we maintain the G. So how can we avoid or mitigate the risk of corruption, making sure that we can have the environmental part dealt with the public authorities?
I don't know who wants to take the question. Brigitte, Matthew, Lillian.
I can go first. The thing is, well, when I worked in the EU, but now I'm in Norway, so of course the corruption is everywhere. But I come from a country, and also I must say, when I worked in the institutions, contact with the public and private is something that is on a daily basis. So you can't do the green transition without this partnership. So we are every day in contact with, or every second day with public institutions, and they contact the private, because it's in hand we have to do this, because there's so much interventions now. For instance, I also work on the hydrogen sector, which is a very good opportunity with regard to what you were talking about, Salvador, to transit the oil and gas. And this is a new market, and then you need a lot of intervention from the public also, which, but I can see it in some countries. But I do also think it's the image which is important to have, which I also think the public, it is a cooperation we're looking at here. There is not any possibilities to do this green transition if we don't do it together.
In my part, it's quite clear. We don't mix the money of the government with the private money. So, for example, if we are going to work together in one project, we invest the same amount of money, but it's completely independent. And every time that we receive money or a donation from an important or a global donor or any donor that we have, this money is completely specifically for one project. And in that case, we as a fund trust, we don't have a checkbook. So every time the money has to go out or to pay something, it has to be through a contract through the fiduciary. So it's completely transparent in our case, but we divide what it's the money of the government and the investment of the private sector.
Thank you very much. We have probably this question can be solved by Matt. I would like to know how can remote sensing or technology can be used to support compliance in environmental issues.
So, so for remote sensing is basically looking at looking down, as I understand the question, looking down at the Earth from satellite imagery or from aerial photos or even geophysical technologies can be used. And I would say, you know, from a day-to-day perspective, we don't need to do a lot of that because we're on the ground and we own the facilities and we can get people out there to do that. I think remote sensing is probably more relied on by the government when they can't get on properties. And so when they want to monitor what's going on at a mine site or what's going on at a refinery or what's going on at a large industrial facility over a period of years, they will monitor that with aerial photos. And I think it could be very effective in seeing changes on the ground. The one place where we do use remote sensing is in due diligence, because we're looking at historical changes on properties. But from a day-to-day compliance, not a ton, and I think more useful to the government for the most part.
Actually, I was looking at the Netflix documentary this weekend and about some with the cannabis industry in California. And the government in California is using satellite images to locate illegal cannabis farms. So it's probably for them, it's very useful. And well, I think that we don't have any more questions right now, so we will close the seminar. And I would just like to make some references or to say some of the keywords that I heard in this session for you to keep in mind, just as a closing message. First, we have green transition, Green Deal. Look at the big picture. Net zero, profitability, innovation, technology, supply chain, efficiency, future, implementation, transparency, coincident, equality, inclusion, diversity, democracy, recovery, accountability, responsibility, sustainable investment, working together, interdisciplinary, in entrepreneurship, value, synchrony, and one goal, a better world. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for our panelists, and see you in September for our session on social standards.